It was just after 6 when Dougie MacCrae opened his eyes, though he hadn't planned to. The room was still dim, but not entirely dark. Somewhere behind the curtains, a faint gray light had begun slipping in. That slow, colorless kind of morning light that doesn't announce itself, just arrives and waits. He lay still for a while, staring at the ceiling. The shadows overhead were soft and familiar. His wife, Eilidh, was asleep beside him, her breathing steady and deep. He didn't move. She always dreamed in the early hours, full, vivid dreams she sometimes spoke aloud. He liked letting her come back from them in her own time. His body felt tight with old rhythms. It wanted him to get up, wash, dress, eat toast standing at the counter, check the time twice, catch the 7:45 bus, nod to the same faces at the station. But all of that was gone now. Last week they'd given him a plaque and a gift certificate for a cream tea at the cafe by the canal. A few kind words and a short round of applause in a municipal office. 30 years vanished in the space of a handshake. He sat up and swung his feet onto the floor. The springs creaked beneath him. His slippers, pushed under the bed the night before, were right where they always were. He slid into them and sat there for a moment, rubbing the side of his face, not quite awake, not quite asleep. Downstairs, the kitchen felt colder than usual, or maybe he was just noticing it more. He flicked the light on and stood with his hand over the kettle, hovering there without switching it on. The floor under his bare feet felt cool, worn in places from years of quiet mornings just like this. Finally, he turned the kettle on. The quiet hiss of water heating filled the kitchen like a familiar whisper. He heard Eilidh's footsteps on the stairs. Her slippers barely made a sound, but he could tell it was her by the way she moved, slow but deliberate, like someone making peace with another early start. She came into the room wrapped in her navy robe, her hair slightly tousled, her face still soft from sleep. She gave him a small, real smile, the kind that looked like it belonged to another time of life, when morning still had shape. "You're up early," she said, her voice low and rough around the edges. "Just habit," he said. He poured the tea and handed her a mug. She took it without a word, the way you only can after 25 years of mornings like this. They sat at the small kitchen table, drinking in silence. Outside, a garbage truck groaned past the house, its brakes squealing as it stopped at the bins up the road. The smell of steam and black tea filled the room. Eilidh looked toward the window, then back at him. "We could go for a walk later," she said, "through the park. The weather's meant to hold." Douglas nodded slightly. "Maybe. I was thinking I might head into town, just for a bit." "Oh?" she asked. Not suspicious, just curious. Nothing specific, just some odds and ends. She looked at him for a moment longer, then sipped her tea. He stood to collect their mugs. She let him take hers even though it was still half full. "What about you?" he asked. "What are you up to today?" She shrugged, pulling her robe tighter across her chest. "Might start that book your sister gave me. Or clean out the linen closet if I'm feeling ambitious." He gave a small, tired chuckle. She stepped forward and kissed him lightly on the cheek. "Try not to get lost." He didn't answer. He gave a small nod, already feeling that low, uncertain pull in his chest, the kind that made a person walk not toward something, but simply away. The front door gave its usual soft groan when he pulled it shut behind him. The key turned without resistance. He hesitated on the step for a moment, as if waiting for a reason to stay, and when none arrived, he started down the pavement. The morning had settled into a dull, dry gray. A weak sun sat behind thick cloud cover, lighting everything with a washed-out glow, the kind that made Falkirk look as though it had been left out in the weather too long. Damp bricks, cracked pavement, the scent of diesel and old rain. He walked with his hands in his jacket pockets. Not fast, not slow. The pace of a man who didn't quite know where he was going, but wanted to look like he did. He passed Calendar Park on the left. The trees were shedding slowly now, early October. Leaves gathered around drains and benches, damp and fragile underfoot. A man with a black Labrador gave him a nod as they crossed paths. Dougie nodded back, but didn't break stride. He crossed the street before he reached the old council building. Not because he feared running into anyone in particular, but because there were still a few faces inside who might wave, or worse, stop him. Ask what retirement felt like. Ask if he missed it yet. The truth was he didn't miss the work, but he missed being someone who worked. That was harder to say. At the roundabout he paused, pretending to check the traffic even though it was light. He could turn back now, head toward the cafe, maybe pick up something for lunch. But instead, almost without choosing, he turned down a narrower street lined with old shops and small businesses. One of them, tucked between a shuttered bakery and a vape shop with a flickering sign, was the Tartan Dog. He hadn't stepped inside in years. During his working life, pubs were for Friday nights and farewell drinks, once or twice a year maybe, for a pint after a meeting. He'd never been one of those men who stopped in every day after work. But now, as he passed the doorway, something about the low golden light spilling from inside made him slow down. He paused just outside the entrance. The door was open slightly, propped that way by a folded cardboard coaster. From inside came the gentle clink of glasses being stacked, the low hum of voices, the steady rhythm of darts thudding against cork. He told himself he'd just take a quick look. Maybe say hello to Jimmy if he was behind the bar. Then leave. Keep moving. He stepped inside. The pub was mostly empty. 3 men scattered across the room, none of them younger than 50. One of them sat at the bar sipping something dark. The other 2 stood near the back wall, facing the dartboard. The board was worn, with faded rings and a loose piece of tape on the floor marking the throw line. An old radio played quietly from somewhere behind the bar, something bluesy and slow. Jimmy Kerr stood polishing glasses, as if he'd been doing it since the day the place opened. "Look who it is," he said without looking up. "Didn't expect to see you in daylight, MacCrae." "Was just walking past," Dougie said. Jimmy raised an eyebrow. "Weren't walking that fast." Dougie gave a small shrug and stepped further in, letting the door ease shut behind him. The air inside was warm and smelled like old wood and beer. Comforting in a way that caught him off guard. "Coffee?" Jimmy asked. "Or are you finally off the leash?" "Coffee's fine." Jimmy disappeared behind the espresso machine. Dougie sat at the end of the bar, near the far window. The stool creaked under him. The 2 men at the dartboard had resumed playing. One threw without much ceremony. A dart hit the outer ring and dropped to the floor. The other laughed. "You'd miss a barn from the inside," the first man said. "I'm just warming up," the second replied. Dougie watched, saying nothing. Jimmy set a cup in front of him, black and steaming. "On the house," he said. "Retirement tax." Dougie nodded his thanks. "You ever throw?" Jimmy asked, motioning toward the board. "Not really." "You look like you've got steady hands." "I used to." He paused. "Probably still do." Don't know. Jimmy gave a short laugh. Most men throw like they're swatting flies, but the ones who don't think too hard about it, sometimes they're the ones who surprise you. Dougie didn't respond. He just watched as one of the darts hit near the treble 20, and the man who threw it raised both hands like a prize fighter. The dartboard turned slowly on its hook. The sound of laughter echoed softly through the empty pub. Something in Dougie's chest flickered, like a light bulb testing its filament. The game at the dartboard had dissolved into mockery. One of the men, a tall fellow with a patchy mustache and too tight jeans, had thrown 3 darts in a row, all of which had landed far outside any meaningful score. One even bounced off the board entirely and clattered to the floor. His friend doubled over in laughter. "Christ, Tommy," he said, wiping his eyes. "You're going to put someone's eye out." "Board's crooked," Tommy muttered. "You seen how it leans?" "It's not the board that's crooked," Jimmy called out from behind the bar. "It's your spine." Dougie chuckled softly into his coffee. The warmth of the room had started to seep into his shoulders. He still had his jacket on, but didn't feel like removing it. He wasn't planning to stay long. Jimmy wandered over with a rag still slung over his shoulder, watching the 2 men gather their darts and bicker half-heartedly about who was winning. Then he turned his gaze toward Dougie. "Go on," Jimmy said. "Give it a go." Dougie blinked. "What? You've been staring at that board like it owes you money. Might as well have a throw." "I haven't played since school." "All the better," Jimmy said. "You won't overthink it." Dougie looked toward the board. The 2 players had stepped aside, one wiping his hands on his jeans, the other watching Dougie now with mild interest, as if wondering whether a new competitor had just wandered in or whether this was just another bored retiree passing time. "I'll make a fool of myself," Dougie said. "Everyone does," Jimmy replied. "That's half the charm." He hesitated, then stood. Jimmy handed him the darts, 3 standard weight, red flights, a little worn but balanced in the palm. Dougie rolled one between his fingers. The weight felt precise, honest. He gave a small test flex of his wrist. The throw line was a strip of tape across the scuffed floor. He stepped up to it, looked at the board, then back at Jimmy. "Do I just aim for the middle?" "That's usually the idea." Dougie took a breath. He lifted the first dart and let it fly. It hit the board with a sharp thunk, landing cleanly in the outer ring of the 20 section. Tommy gave a low whistle. "Well, would you look at that?" Jimmy muttered. Dougie said nothing. He was already raising the second dart. This one struck closer, just above the treble line, near the 5. A miss, technically, but straight, clean, balanced. He could feel something now, a shape forming in the air between his hand and the board. Not confidence exactly, not even control. More like familiarity, like recognizing an old song you didn't know you knew. He threw the third dart. It landed just beside the bullseye, slightly high and to the right, but so close it drew a small pause from the room. No one clapped. No one laughed. Tommy scratched his jaw. His friend folded his arms. Jimmy leaned forward, eyes narrowed. Dougie lowered his arm slowly, fingers still in the air, as if holding the ghost of the last throw. "Well," Jimmy said after a moment, "either you've been practicing in secret, or we just witnessed something unnatural." Dougie smiled faintly. "Lucky throw." "3 times in a row?" He shrugged. "Beginner's luck then." Jimmy reached over and plucked the darts from the board himself, studying the placement before handing them back. "You're not a beginner," he said quietly. "Not really." Dougie didn't answer. He set the darts gently on the counter, took a last sip of his coffee, and said, "Thanks for the cup. You heading out?" "Just a quick stop," he said, already pulling his jacket tighter. Jimmy nodded, but didn't stop watching him. "Come back tomorrow," he said. Dougie paused at the door. "Why?" Jimmy gave him a look that landed somewhere between amusement and curiosity. "Because the board wants to know if you meant it." The door of the tartan dog swung shut behind him with a soft click, sealing in the warmth and wood smoke. Outside, the town had settled into its mid-morning rhythm, shops opening halfway, sandwich boards creaking on uneven pavement, the quiet shuffle of pedestrians, not in any particular rush. Dougie stood on the doorstep a moment, adjusting to the cool air. It wasn't cold, not yet, but the kind of chill that carried the suggestion of winter behind it. The sky was still that same flat gray, like someone had painted over the sun and forgotten to finish. He started walking. The dart throws replayed themselves, without his permission. The first one, a bit high, but clean. The second, straighter, smoother. The third, that final dart, the one that seemed to leave his hand as if it already knew where it was going. It hadn't hit the bull, not quite, but it had brushed the edge like it wanted to. He flexed his right hand as he walked, pressing his thumb into the soft pad between finger and palm. It was nothing, a few casual throws in a pub. A good laugh. Beginner's luck, like he said. Still. He turned a corner and passed a shop with mirrored windows. In the reflection, he caught a glimpse of himself. Hands deep in jacket pockets, posture straight, expression neutral. The same man as always. But there was something in the eyes. A flicker, a trace of alertness. He wasn't used to seeing that anymore. The walk home felt shorter than it had earlier that morning. He crossed the park at a diagonal, stepping over a strip of soggy grass to avoid a group of teenagers smoking near a bench. They didn't look at him. By the time he reached his street, the bins had been emptied and dragged back to the side of the houses. A sparrow flitted out from under a bush, darting low across the pavement and disappearing into a hedge. He reached the front door, paused a moment, then let himself in. The house smelled like lemon polish and tea. Eilidh was in the living room, seated on the floor with a pile of old towels and linens scattered beside her. She looked up when he stepped in. "There he is," she said. "Did you find what you were looking for?" He shrugged out of his jacket and hung it on the hook by the door. "Not sure," he said. She smiled softly. "Well, you were out long enough to have found something." He walked past the living room archway and into the kitchen, where he opened the fridge, stared inside, then closed it again. Back in the living room, Eilidh had resumed folding towels, humming to herself, a tune he half recognized but couldn't place. He watched her for a moment, then went upstairs. In their bedroom, he sat on the edge of the bed and pulled off his shoes slowly. The house was quiet, except for the faint hum of the boiler clicking on. That night, they ate a simple dinner, lentil soup and bread, the kind of meal they'd had hundreds of times. They spoke in low tones about the news, a letter from the bank, a neighbor's new dog. The darts never came up. When they climbed into bed, Eilidh reached over and turned off the light. Her breathing slowed as she drifted toward sleep. Dougie lay on his back, staring at the ceiling again. After a long while, his right hand lifted gently in the dark. He held it out in front of him, fingers curled slightly, thumb resting against the index finger, like it had earlier that day, just before the throw. He didn't know why he was doing it. He closed his fingers once, slowly, then opened them again. The motion was silent, precise, and small enough not to wake her. He returned on a Wednesday morning. He didn't plan it. He didn't wake up thinking, "I'll go to the pub." It wasn't that kind of decision. It was more like something quiet in his body pulling him in the direction of something it recognized before he could name it. The air outside was colder than it had been Monday. A sharper wind came in off the canal, and the leaves in the gutters had started turning brittle. He kept his hands in his coat pockets as he walked, passing familiar storefronts without really seeing them. By the time he reached the Tartan Dog, it was just after 10. The pub wasn't open yet, not officially, but the door was unlocked. He tested the handle and stepped inside. No music this time. The bar lights were off, but the dartboard at the back wall was lit by a single overhead bulb, its white paint faded at the edges, numbers worn and frayed. Jimmy was crouched behind the bar, unpacking bottles from a cardboard box. He looked up when the door opened and raised an eyebrow. "Back again," he said, voice even. "Yeah," Dougie said. He didn't offer anything more. Jimmy stood and wiped his hands on his apron. "Didn't think I'd see you midweek. Thought I scared you off with the praise." "I was just walking," Dougie said. "Figured I'd stop in." Jimmy gave him a look, but didn't press. "Board's there," he said, nodding toward the back wall. "Darts are in the tin." Dougie crossed the room slowly. The tin was where he remembered it, a dented old biscuit tin with a hinged lid, full of mismatched darts. He picked out the same red-flighted ones he'd used before. He tested the weight of them in his palm, bounced them gently in his grip like he might be testing a fruit for ripeness. The room was still. No one else had come in. The only sound was the occasional clink of bottles behind the bar and the low groan of the floorboards beneath his shoes. He stepped behind the tape line, looked at the board. The first throw landed high, just inside the 20. He adjusted. The second landed closer. Treble 20. The third, just inside the inner bull. He exhaled slowly. He collected the darts and threw again. Time folded in on itself. He didn't think about hours or errands or lunch or the street outside. All that existed was the space between his fingers and the board, the line, the weight, the flight. There was no force in the throw, no aggression, just precision. A sense of waiting for the moment when his hand and the air agreed on what should happen. He threw, retrieved, threw again. Each set fell into a rhythm. Not perfect, but close. Behind him, Jimmy had stopped restocking. Dougie didn't turn around. He could feel the man's eyes on him, but it didn't bother him. It felt distant, like someone watching from the other side of a window. Another dart landed near the triple ring. He lowered his hand, slow and steady. The silence pressed in again. Finally, Jimmy spoke. "You do this before?" "No," Dougie said. Jimmy waited. "Not in school? Not as a kid?" "No," Dougie repeated. "First time was Monday." Jimmy gave a quiet whistle. "You know what you're doing, though." Dougie looked down at the darts in his hand. The paint on one of them was chipped. The flight on another had a small tear. "I don't think I do," he said. Jimmy leaned an elbow on the bar, watching him. Then you're either lying or you're a freak. Dougie gave the smallest of smiles. Might be both. He stepped back to the throw line, raised his hand again. The door clicked shut behind him with a practiced hand, quiet but final. The house was warm, warmer than the pub had been, and filled with the soft, comforting scent of orange peel and tea. Eilidh's slippers made a light sound as she crossed the hallway into view, a mug in one hand, a folded newspaper in the other. She wore a cable-knit cardigan over a striped top, her hair pulled up loosely with a silver clip. She looked at him as she entered, but didn't speak right away. Instead, she sat down in the armchair by the front window, settled the mug on the coaster, and smoothed the newspaper over her knee. The crossword was half-finished in black ink. "You were out a while," she said finally, not looking up. He kicked off his shoes by the door. Took a longer walk than planned. "Still dry out?" "For now." She sipped her tea and studied a clue. He crossed the room and sat on the edge of the couch opposite her. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on knees, hands clasped, like he might say something. But he didn't. She glanced at him, her pen resting against her lip. "You look flushed." "Walked fast coming back," he said. She made a small sound of acknowledgement and returned to her puzzle. The room was quiet, except for the rustle of paper and the slow ticking of the kitchen clock down the hall. Outside the window, a pair of school kids walked past, kicking leaves along the pavement. One of them was laughing, the kind of unfiltered sound that made no effort to explain itself. Eilidh set her pen down. "There's leftover soup in the fridge." "Okay. I'll heat some up around 1 if you're hungry." He nodded. Another pause settled between them. Not strained, just unfilled. She turned the paper toward him and pointed to a blank square. 5 letters. A quiet withdrawal or retreat. Starts with R. He didn't answer right away. His gaze was elsewhere, fixed on a spot beyond the window. "Retreat," he said finally. "That's in the clue," she smiled. "Too obvious." "Resign?" She tilted her head, considered it. "Could be." She filled it in lightly, not pressing hard with the pen. "Where'd you go?" she asked, her tone even offhand. "Anywhere nice?" He blinked, then looked at her. "Just around. Walked past the shops." She nodded slowly. "Did you stop anywhere?" He hesitated. "Had a coffee." "By yourself?" "Yeah." She held his gaze for a moment. Not suspicious, just looking. "Good," she said. "Nice to do things on your own." He nodded, unsure whether it was meant as a blessing or a warning. Maybe neither. She turned the newspaper back toward herself and refocused on the puzzle. He sat back, the couch creaking slightly under his weight. His eyes wandered to the bookshelf, to the framed photos on the mantel. Callum in his school uniform, the 3 of them in sky, a blurry one of him and Eilidh on a windy cliffside. The silence returned, but it had a new shape to it now. She took another sip of tea and didn't look up. "You seem different today," she said softly after a while. "Do I?" "Just a little." He gave a small shrug. "I suppose that happens." She smiled at that, faint and private, and turned another page of the newspaper. The bread was just an excuse. He told Eilidh he'd forgotten to grab a loaf earlier and thought he'd pop back into town before the shops closed. She didn't question it, only asked if he'd stop at the butcher too. He said he might. but his feet, as if independent from the rest of him, curved their path not toward the baker's or the butcher's, but toward the low, familiar facade of the Tartan Dog. This time the pub was more alive. A handful of regulars sat at the bar, and a young couple had taken a table near the window, laughing over a shared plate of chips. The radio was tuned to a sports station now, low enough to ignore unless you were trying to. Someone had lit a candle on the bar for no reason other than habit. Jimmy saw him the second he walked in. "Back again," he called from his post behind the counter, one brow raised. "You thinking of moving in?" "Just passing through," Dougie said. "Must be some scenic route between here and the bakery." Dougie said nothing, only walked past the bar to the tin near the dartboard and opened it without asking. The same red flighted darts were there, right where he'd left them. Jimmy watched him for a beat, then resumed drying a glass. "You've got a bit of a look on you today." "What kind of look?" "The kind that means you're thinking about something too much." "I'm not thinking," Dougie said. "That's worse," Jimmy muttered. He threw. The first dart hit clean, right in the treble 20. The board gave that satisfying muted thud. The second was just outside it, slightly low. The third corrected. Dead center. He stepped forward, retrieved them, walked back. Threw again. The rhythm was there, already alive in his wrist and shoulder, a kind of mechanical calm. One motion feeding the next. Jimmy leaned over and reached beneath the bar, pulling out a score pad, one of those old tournament ones with faded ink and a broken clip at the top. He grabbed a pen and started jotting down numbers. Dougie didn't notice at first. It wasn't until his third round, 3 darts all clustered in the upper 20s, that he turned and saw Jimmy marking something down. "What's that?" Jimmy looked up, deadpan. "You ever heard of the Pub League?" "Not really." "Local circuit. Pretty informal. Mix of ringers and has-beens. Qualifiers are in 2 weeks. Dougie narrowed his eyes. "You think I should enter?" "I think you should know you're scoring better than most of the fellas who do." "I'm not a pub league guy." Jimmy snorted. "You're in a pub, throwing darts." "What else do you need?" Dougie turned back toward the board, his eyes scanning the worn red center. "Never really liked competition," he said. "You liked winning on Monday." "I didn't win anything." Jimmy raised a finger. "But you threw like you meant to. Don't think I didn't notice." Dougie gave a dry laugh and threw again. All 3 darts landed within an inch of each other, clustered just above the bullseye. Jimmy didn't speak. He marked the numbers silently and left the pad where Dougie could see it. Scores in the 70s, 80s, low 90s, round after round. Dougie stared at the page. "I'll think about it," he said, and didn't look up. Jimmy shrugged and went back to the bar. "That's all I'm asking." The light in the kitchen was soft and amber when Dougie walked back through the door, the late afternoon already folding into evening. He dropped the bread bag on the counter, still warm through the paper, and took a moment before removing his coat, standing still like someone who'd just come in from a storm that hadn't quite happened yet. Eilidh was at the stove. The smell of curry spices hung in the air, warm, earthy, familiar. She stirred something with slow, deliberate motions, her eyes following the rhythm of the spoon. "You found bread," she said, without turning around. "Found better than I meant to," he replied. "Fresh batch just out." She smiled faintly, but didn't answer. They ate at the table by the window, quiet but not uncomfortable. The news played softly in the background. low enough to ignore. They talked about the neighbor's new fence, a pothole that had finally been filled in by the council, a strange-looking bird Eilidh had seen in the garden that morning. Dougie complimented the food. She waved it off but looked pleased anyway. When the dishes were cleared, they washed and dried them together like they always had. She handed him the plates one by one, and he stacked them neatly in the cupboard. There was comfort in the routine, the way their hands moved around each other without thought, like a well-practiced dance. But underneath that rhythm, something had shifted. Later, they sat in the living room. Eilidh worked her way through another crossword, a second cup of tea in hand. Dougie sat nearby, flipping absently through a magazine he wasn't reading. The room ticked with little sounds. The clock, the fridge motor, the slow shift of the house settling into night. He yawned once and stood. "Heading up?" she asked. "Think so. I'll be up in a bit." He nodded, gave her shoulder a light squeeze in passing. When she came to bed 20 minutes later, he was already lying down, awake but still. The room was dark, but not fully. The moonlight through the blinds cast soft lines across the floorboards. She climbed in beside him and pulled the covers up, her body warm against his. For a while, neither of them said anything. Then, just as she was settling in, she turned toward him. "You've been somewhere else lately," she said quietly. Her voice wasn't accusing. It was gentle, curious. Dougie stared at the ceiling. "I know," he said. She didn't ask where. He didn't offer. After a few minutes, she reached out and rested her hand lightly on his chest. He covered it with his own. The silence that followed was soft. Not full of answers, but not heavy either. They lay there together, still. And somewhere, in the dark space behind his closed eyes, he felt again the shape of the dart in his fingers. Weightless, waiting, just on the edge of motion. The sign-up sheet was crooked. It had been taped, unevenly, at a slant, to the cabinet next to the dartboard in the tartan dog. A single strip of masking tape ran across the top, curling at one end like it couldn't quite commit to the task. Names had been scrawled across the lines in various shades of ink, ballpoint, and felt tip, with handwriting that ranged from careful to chaotic. Tiny Davy, Gaz, Knuckles, Kev, Lefty, G. Dougie stood in front of it, holding the pen Jimmy had handed him. It was one of those cheap click pens with half the branding rubbed off, the kind you find at community banks and never remember taking. "Go on," Jimmy said, arms crossed, watching him from a few feet away. "You've got a steadier hand than half the lot already on there." Dougie hesitated. "I'm not a league guy, you know. No one is, until they are. It's just a few matches in a back room with too much fried food and too little air. No one's expecting trophies." Still, Dougie didn't move. Jimmy stepped forward, pointed at the form. "This is just a line," he said. "You cross it or you don't." After a moment, Dougie clicked the pen and leaned in. He didn't use a nickname. He just wrote, "Dougie MacCrae." Straight across the empty line, in plain, practical print. It looked out of place between Tiny Davy and Kev, Lefty, like a misplaced library card in a drawer full of betting slips. He capped the pen, handed it back. Jimmy gave a short nod, then turned and wandered back behind the bar like nothing had happened. Dougie stared at the sheet a moment longer, then turned and left without a word. That night, Eilidh found the entry form in his jacket pocket. Folded once, the ink slightly smudged. She held it up in the kitchen while he rinsed plates at the sink. "So you did it," she said. He glanced back over his shoulder. "Jimmy talked me into it." "I didn't realize Jimmy was so persuasive." "He's relentless," Dougie muttered. She unfolded the paper and scanned the list. "Knuckles? Really?" Dougie shrugged. "It's not Wimbledon." She looked at him, eyebrows raised. "You didn't pick a name?" "I already have one." No flair at all. "I'm not a magician." She set the paper down and leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching him rinse the last plate. "Are you nervous?" He paused slightly, then resumed. "Not really." "That's not a no." He didn't answer. She stepped forward, took the plate from his hands, and dried it. Their fingers brushed for a moment. "I think it's good," she said. "What is?" "That you're doing something. For yourself." He nodded faintly and turned off the tap. "You'll come?" he asked, without looking at her. "Of course," she said. She smiled as she said it. And though he smiled back, just barely, he felt something move in his chest that didn't have a name yet, a blend of anticipation and something close to dread. The back room of the Copper Stag smelled like salt, beer, and something fried that had once been potato. The dartboards were mounted on cheap plywood walls, ringed with old chalk stains and scuff marks. Folding chairs had been dragged into loose rows for the players, but no one sat still. Most leaned, paced, fiddled with their darts. There was a table against the far wall with a bowl of crisps, a stack of laminated scorecards, and a clipboard with someone's greasy pint glass resting on top of it. A speaker in the corner played a fuzzy classic rock playlist, halfway between background noise and distraction. Something by Thin Lizzy. Nobody was listening. Dougie and Eilidh stood just inside the doorway, taking it in. "Well," she said after a beat, "it's democratic." Dougie huffed something like a laugh. "Smells like someone deep-fried a shoe." "I think they did." "And charged for it." He glanced around. A few of the players looked familiar from the Tartan Dog. Others he didn't recognize. Younger men, mostly. Tight shirts, dart cases clipped to their belts, branded wristbands. One wore wraparound sunglasses indoors. Someone yelled, "Kev, you're on lane 2." Eilidh touched Dougie's arm. "Do you want me to sit somewhere else?" He shook his head. "No, stay where I can see you." She smiled gently and made her way toward the back, near a radiator. She pulled a paperback and a folded crossword from her bag, settled in like she'd done this 100 times, which she hadn't, but she made it look like she had. Dougie stayed where he was, near the door. He wasn't pacing, but his weight shifted often. He held the darts Jimmy had given him, slightly newer than the ones from the tin. Slim barrels, white flights. The grip felt familiar already, like a good pen or a key you've turned 1,000 times. A voice called out, "Dougie MacCrae." "You're up on board 3. He froze just long enough to feel it. Then he moved. Board 3 was set at the far end of the room, under a buzzing overhead light that made the wall look yellow. His opponent was already there, a man in his early 30s with a shaved head, hoop earring, and a long neck tattoo of a phoenix or a snake. He grinned when he saw Dougie. "This you?" the man asked. "Douglas?" Dougie nodded. "Didn't think we had any retirees in the bracket tonight?" He smirked, held out a hand. "Dean." Dougie shook it. "Pleasure." Dean threw first, a quick warm-up, loose, flashy, a little wild. His darts hit hard but scattered. Still, he seemed confident. "Best of 3?" Dean asked. "Sure." They began. Dean opened strong. 2 20s and a 15. He grinned after each throw, nodding like he'd just confirmed something only he had predicted. Dougie stood quiet behind the line. He took a slow breath. Released. Treble 20, single 20, inner ring. He said nothing, just stepped back. Dean narrowed his eyes. All right, then. The match wasn't clean. Dougie's hand trembled on the second set. One dart slipped wide, but when he found his rhythm, it felt like something clicked back into place. He started noticing things. The sound of the dart's flight, the subtle weight shift in his heel, the moment just before release when everything felt suspended. They went to 3 rounds. In the final throw, Dean missed the double. Groaned audibly. Dougie landed a neat 15, just enough to close it. There was no cheering, but a few nearby players paused, eyes shifting. Dougie stepped back, heart beating faster than he wanted to admit. Dean gave him a good-natured shrug. "Well, look at that." "Good game," Dougie said, voice low. From the back of the room, Eilidh raised her eyebrows over the top of her crossword and gave him a small nod. Jimmy, leaning against a support beam with a beer in hand, met Dougie's eye across the room. He didn't smile, just gave a look, steady, unsurprised, like this was all exactly how it was supposed to go. He returned to the edge of the room where Eilidh was sitting, a slight sheen of sweat at his hairline. She looked up from her crossword and tilted her head. "You didn't look like you were guessing." He shrugged, still catching his breath. He wasn't bad. He looked furious. He was furious at himself. She held out her glass. "Taste this. It's some kind of grapefruit pale ale. I don't know whether I like it." He took a sip. Thought about it. "Tastes like someone soaked a sock in marmalade," he said. "That's a no, then." He handed it back, then sat down beside her. The folding chair tilted slightly under his weight, and he adjusted to keep it from rocking. "Are you enjoying it?" she asked. He didn't answer right away, not because he was unsure, but because the question opened something larger than he expected. Enjoying it? He was focused, alert, grounded. He wasn't thinking about the time or the noise or what anyone else was doing. When he threw, the rest of the room vanished. There was no comparison for it, except, maybe, the brief stillness before a snowfall, when the air feels so quiet and heavy, you can almost hear it land. "I don't know if enjoying is the right word," he said. She looked at him, thoughtful. "Maybe it doesn't have to be." Another name was called from the other side of the room. A pair of young men moved toward board 2, one of them wearing a shirt with his own face printed on the back. A woman in a leather jacket walked past with a tray of drinks and gave Dougie a sideways glance as she did. He stood again. The next match was his. "I'll be here," Eilidh said, already reaching for her pen again. He walked to the board. His second opponent was older, mid-50s, polite, quiet. A teacher maybe, or an accountant. No swagger, no earrings, no fake bravado. They shook hands. Neither said much. Dougie threw first. This time it came easier. His grip felt natural, his breath even. The board didn't seem as far away. First throw, treble 20. Second, 19. Third, inner ring. The other man nodded, clearly impressed, but didn't say a word. It was over in 2 rounds. As he pulled his darts from the board after the winning throw, a few people clapped. Not much, just a few hands from nearby tables. A short burst, then gone. He turned toward Eilidh. She was watching him closely now. The crossword had been set aside. He saw something in her expression. Not surprise, not pride, but recognition. Like she was seeing a version of him she hadn't looked at in years. Not a different man, just a part of the same one, newly uncovered. When he returned to her side, she didn't speak right away. "You looked calm," she said finally. "I felt calm." "Are you going to keep going?" "I guess I have to now." "No," she said. "I mean, after this." He looked at her. He wasn't ready for that question yet. From across the room, Jimmy raised his glass slightly in Dougie's direction, then took a sip without breaking eye contact. Dougie didn't wave back. He just turned to the board again, already thinking through the weight in his fingers, the line of the next throw. The night had cooled by the time they stepped outside. The pub's muffled music faded behind them as the door swung shut. Out here, the air was sharp and quiet, the kind of quiet that made their footsteps sound louder than they were. A light breeze moved down the street, just enough to push at the hem of Eilidh's coat and ruffle the top of Dougie's collar. They didn't speak at first. The sidewalks were empty. A few shop windows still glowed, but the blinds were drawn. Somewhere in the distance a dog barked once, sharp and far away. They passed the post office, the bakery with its metal shutters drawn, the familiar patch of cracked sidewalk near the crossing light that had never quite been fixed. Eilidh walked with her hands tucked into her sleeves. After a few minutes, she slid one arm through Dougie's. He let her. "You were good," she said, voice low. He gave a small shake of the head. "I was all right. I wasn't the one keeping score, but that didn't look like all right." He exhaled slowly, watching the mist of his breath disappear into the dark. "I don't know what it is," he said. "What?" "This whole thing. It's darts," she said gently. He smiled, barely. "It's not just darts." They reached the corner where the streetlights got patchier. He looked up for a moment. The stars were faint behind the clouds. He hadn't looked up in days. She slowed her pace. "Do you want to go further with it?" He didn't answer right away. They walked another full block before he said anything at all. "I don't think I want to win," he said. "I just want to see what happens if I don't stop." Eilidh didn't reply. Not right away. Then she slipped her hand down and laced her fingers through his. They walked like that, quiet, unhurried, as the neighborhood gave way to their street. When they reached the house, he paused at the gate, looked up at the window. Everything inside was just as they left it, neat, warm, still. "I should be tired," he said. "Are you?" He shook his head. "Not yet." They went inside without turning on the overhead light. The house held its own hush, one they didn't disturb. Later in the bedroom, she reached for his hand as he climbed into bed beside her. No words, just the weight of her palm against his. He stared at the ceiling in the dark, heart still steady from the match. Not fast, not slow. Just there. He didn't know what came next. But something in him, quiet and unfamiliar, was beginning to believe that not knowing was the point. The board arrived on a Thursday afternoon in a plain brown box. Dougie signed for it at the door, thanked the courier, and stood for a moment in the hall, just holding it. The weight of it was modest, but there was a heaviness to it that felt earned. Inside was the official board. Not the kind you'd find in the back of a pub or a family rec room, but a tournament-spec windmow with a proper surround and wall mount. Jimmy had pointed him toward it. If you're going to practice, you might as well throw at the thing you'll be staring at for the rest of your life. Eilidh was in the kitchen when he carried it through. "Is that it?" she asked, not surprised. He nodded, setting the box gently on the table. She dried her hands on a towel and came over, reading the side of the packaging. "Looks serious." "It's just a board." "It's not just a board if it came with instructions." He didn't argue. She was smiling when she said it. By evening, he'd cleared the back wall of the garage, moved a shelf of paint cans, dusted down a row of old tools, swept the floor. The space smelled of rust and cardboard and cold concrete. A bare bulb overhead swung gently from its chain, casting long shadows with every movement. He measured the regulation height, marked it, measured again. When he drilled the first hole, Eilidh appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame. She had a cup of tea in her hand, hair pulled back, sleeves pushed up. "Need a second pair of hands?" she asked. He shook his head without looking at her. "I've got it." She didn't say anything else, just stood there for a while, sipping her tea, watching the care with which he mounted the board, the way he stepped back between every motion to check the balance, to see how the light hit it. When it was done, he stepped to the far end of the garage and marked out the oche with a strip of tape. Same distance as the pubs. Measured that too. Twice. Then he stood there. Just stood, with the darts in his hand and the new board in front of him, pristine and waiting. He threw. Thunk, thunk, thunk. The sound echoed slightly against the garage walls. It was a satisfying sound, clean, centered. He retrieved the darts and threw again. Outside the open door, the last of the evening light faded. The garage was dim now, the bulb above humming softly, shadows deepening in the corners. Eilidh had disappeared at some point. He hadn't noticed. He didn't stop. He threw for 20 minutes, then 30. He adjusted his grip, watched his stance, corrected small habits without thinking. The room narrowed until there was nothing left but the line, the board, the air between. He didn't notice the door had closed until he heard the soft metal click of it being pulled down. No slam, no protest, just the steady, deliberate sound of it being shut. He stopped throwing. The darts hung loose in his fingers. The board stared back, unchanged. The days didn't go missing all at once. They thinned out. It began with small shifts. Mornings when Dougie left the house without saying where he was going. Afternoons spent measuring tape in the garage, or walking into town and forgetting to bring anything back. Not forgetfulness exactly. Just a kind of narrowing. He moved like someone walking through a corridor that kept getting smaller. He wasn't distant with Eilidh, not rude, not withdrawn. He was still himself, still kind, still quiet, still helpful with the dishes and quick to refill her tea. But something had changed. His presence was different. He was in the room, but not anchored there. At first, Eilidh adjusted without complaint. She started attending a book group at the library on Tuesdays. 6 retired women and 1 former solicitor with a stammer and too many opinions about George Eliot. She liked the group more than she admitted. They brought biscuits in paper tins and argued about sentence structure like it mattered. She began reorganizing the upstairs linen cupboard, something she'd been meaning to do for years, but had never found time for. When that was finished, she tackled the bottom kitchen drawer, the one full of spare batteries and expired coupons, and keys that no longer fit anything. She was careful not to hover. If Dougie was out, she didn't ask where. If he returned late, she didn't press. But she noticed. She noticed the half-eaten lunches, the way his tea went cold in the microwave, the way he stared at the table after dinner like he wasn't ready to be done with the day, but couldn't explain what was still left to do. On Thursday, they were supposed to go to Morag's for tea. Eilidh had mentioned it twice during the week. 3 o'clock, she'd said. Not dinner. Just tea and a catch-up. Dougie had nodded both times. He hadn't written it down. By the time she realized he wasn't coming, it was already past. She sat at the kitchen table with a cup of lukewarm peppermint tea, looking out at the quiet street. When he finally walked in, his jacket dusted with rain, he looked immediately toward the stove, not with guilt, but confusion. She was still seated. He froze. "What?" he asked softly. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "Morag made a lemon tart. You missed it." His face fell just slightly. "I forgot. I know. I thought it was tomorrow." She didn't reply. He took a step forward. "I'm sorry." She nodded once and stood, walking to the sink and tipping out the rest of her tea. "No harm done," she said. And it was true. There was no fight, no slammed doors, no accusations. Just the hollow absence of a moment that should have belonged to both of them, and didn't. That night, they ate soup in silence. The spoon clinked against the bowl, again and again. At one point, she said, "It's all right, Dougie. You don't have to explain it." But he felt, more than anything, that he should have tried. It was a slow afternoon at the Tartan Dog, the kind where the rain doesn't come all at once but settles over everything like a fog that can't make up its mind. The pub lights were dimmed, the air slightly damp, and the usual two pensioners were bickering softly about the football scores in the corner. Jimmy was behind the bar, reorganizing shelves he'd already alphabetized twice that month. Dougie was throwing. Not hard, not like practice. Just a rhythm to keep the hand warm, to keep the mind still. Thunk, thunk, thunk. He retrieved the darts, then started again. Jimmy watched for a few rounds before he spoke. "You ever been to Sterling?" he asked, like he was talking about weather. Dougie didn't look up. "Driven through. Haven't stayed. There's a tournament there next weekend. Regional amateur bracket. Not one of your pub league meat raffles. This one's clean. Good players, real structure, spotters, bracket draws, the whole bit." Dougie stepped behind the line again, paused. "You going?" Jimmy chuckled. "I'm not the one they want to see." Dougie threw. "So why bring it up?" Jimmy leaned on the bar. "Because they're asking for names. And I gave them yours." This time, Dougie did look up. "You what?" "I told them I knew a quiet older bastard who plays like he's been doing it since birth and still acts like he doesn't care." Dougie walked over, picked up his glass. "I never said I was trying to go anywhere with this." "You didn't have to," Jimmy said. "That's the difference between a hobby and a calling. One stays in the garage. The other taps you on the shoulder when you're pretending to be asleep." Dougie didn't answer. He stared at the rim of his glass. Jimmy leaned closer, quieter now. "If you say no, no one's going to think less of you. But if you say no because you're afraid of where it leads, well, that's your call." He stepped back and began wiping the bar with a clean towel, as if nothing had been said at all. That night, the house smelled like roasted vegetables and rosemary. Eilidh was plating dinner when Dougie brought it up. "There's a tournament in Stirling next weekend," he said, watching the way she drizzled oil over the greens. "Jimmy thinks I should enter." She set the spoon down gently. "Stirling?" He nodded. "Regional bracket. Bit more serious than here." "And do you think you should enter?" He paused. "I think I should see what it feels like." She took 2 plates to the table, then came back for cutlery. "Will you go alone?" "I think so. Jimmy might come." She didn't speak for a moment. Then, "Do you want me to come?" He looked at her. "Would you?" "Of course." He nodded slowly. "Let me see how it goes first." She smiled faintly. "All right." They sat down. She passed him the bread. He took it. The meal was good. The conversation was light. But when she cleared the plates and stood at the sink, she stayed there longer than she needed to, hands under the water, staring out the window into the dark. She didn't ask again if he wanted her to come. The sound of the darts had changed, not the pitch. That soft, dry thunk of metal and sisal was still the same. But the rhythm. It had become faster, tighter, less like a game, more like a metronome. Dougie stood in the garage, shirt sleeves rolled, sweat gathering at the back of his neck despite the cold. The bare bulb overhead buzzed softly. The space around him had narrowed to the width of a lane. Thunk. Retrieve. Return. Throw. He didn't keep score anymore. Not tonight. It wasn't about numbers. Not this close to Stirling. It was about feel, the release, the drop of the shoulder, the last second before the dart left his hand. He threw again. Thunk. Behind him, the door opened. He didn't turn. He knew it was her. He could feel it. Eilidh stood in the frame, wrapped in a cardigan. Her hands were at her sides. She didn't speak. He threw another round. 3 darts, fast, all clustered tight in the top left quadrant of the board. Then he let his hand fall to his side. Still, she said nothing. The silence in the garage thickened. Finally, she stepped forward once, far enough that her voice wouldn't have to carry. "You're somewhere else again." He turned slightly toward her, but not all the way. "I know. I'm not trying to stop you." "I didn't think you were." She looked down at the concrete floor, scuffed and dark, then back up at him. "What are we doing now, then?" she asked, softly. The question landed in the air like dust, slow, suspended. He turned to face her fully now, the darts still in one hand, his other clenched loosely at his side. She wasn't angry. Not quite. But her voice had a shape to it. Not sharp, but certain. Like she'd been turning that question over in her hands for days before saying it aloud. Dougie blinked. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. She didn't fill the silence. She waited. After a long moment, he set the darts gently on the shelf by the wall. Not dropped. Placed. Then he wiped his hands on his trousers and leaned against the workbench. "I don't know," he said. Her eyes softened. "That's not an answer." "I know." She took another step toward him. The bulb above them flickered once, then steadied. "I thought retirement would feel like settling in," she said. "Slowing down together." "I did too. And now." He looked at her. "I feel like I'm moving for the first time in years." She nodded slowly. "I can see that. But I don't know where it goes." "Neither do I." They stood there like that, not far apart, but not quite together either. The silence between them now was not passive. It had edges, It wanted something. He reached out, lightly touched her arm, just for a second. She leaned into it. Not all the way, just enough. Then she turned, walked to the door, and opened it. Cool air swept in across the floor. She didn't look back as she left, but she didn't close the door behind her either. Sterling was wet when he arrived, not with rain, but with the leftover weight of it. Pavement still slick, air thick with it. The kind of damp that sat in the back of your throat like something left unsaid. He stepped off the bus just past 9. No one else disembarked. He was alone on the short walk from the depot to the venue, a low, brutalist social club built in the 70s and never forgiven for it. Concrete walls, wide windows fogged over with condensation, and a flickering sign out front. North 4th Social, events, weddings, bingo. Below that, taped awkwardly to the glass door, was a sheet of printer paper with the words, Regional Darts Qualifier. Sign in 9 to 10:30. He stood there for a moment with his small bag slung over one shoulder. No fanfare. No welcoming committee. Just the sound of the wind pushing wrappers across the pavement and the faint hum of electric lights inside. He went in. The main hall was larger than he expected. Not impressive, just big. Rows of folding chairs, long plastic tables, 4 dartboards mounted across the far wall, each surrounded by black foam rings and floodlights that made the rest of the room feel dim by contrast. The carpet was a deep maroon, worn, bald in places. It smelled of bleach, coffee, and heating ducts that hadn't been cleaned since before lockdown. Men in hoodies and polo shirts moved about, laughing loudly, jostling, checking clipboards. A woman with short hair and an earpiece sat behind a folding table labeled Registration. Dougie stepped forward. Name? She asked without looking up. Douglas MacCrae. She ran her finger down a list. Unranked. Local referral. Falkirk. He nodded. She gave him a Sharpie-marked badge and a paper bracket. You're in Block C, 3rd match. He thanked her and stepped aside. There were no introductions, no real place to go. The hall was open, loud, disjointed, voices bouncing off the walls, the clap of darts hitting board, occasional bursts of laughter that sounded too large for the room. He found an empty chair near the edge of the room and sat. He didn't speak, didn't smile. He just watched. Across from him, a man with tattooed knuckles was oiling the shaft of his darts with precision, wiping each one with a scrap of cloth, eyes narrowed. Another man paced along the wall, reciting numbers under his breath, earbuds in. Everyone moved like they'd done this before. Like this mattered. Not just the match, but the ritual of it. Dougie felt it. The sense of walking into something that had already been happening without him. He looked down at the bracket in his hand. His name was there, printed with the others. C1. Trevor Lawton vias Douglas MacCrae. C2. Robbie Spikes v. James Gill. C3. Winner C1 versus winner C2. He folded the paper once and slipped it into his coat pocket. Then he sat back and listened. The crowd wasn't big, maybe 40, 50 people milling about. But the noise they made had a strange pressure to it, like they were filling more space than they had. The chairs scraped, the lights buzzed. Somewhere, a man coughed harshly, twice. And Dougie thought suddenly of the house, of Eilidh sitting by the front window with a crossword and a cup of tea, of the slow rhythm of spoons on plates and quiet taps running, of the dartboard in the garage and the smell of damp wood. He felt the tilt of it then, how far he'd come from the even balance of their days, how quickly this had become a second life, not a secret one, not hidden, just elsewhere. And he wondered, not for the first time, if there was a version of himself that could stand fully in both. Block C, Match 1, Lawton and MacCrae to Board 2. The voice was loud, cracking through the tinny PA system. It startled no one but Dougie. He stood slowly, palms flat against his thighs for a moment before pushing up. His feet were colder than they had been. The chair scraped quietly against the linoleum. As he walked toward Board 2, he glanced once toward the woman at the registration table. She was now calling out more names, sorting brackets. No one was looking at him. His opponent was already at the board. Trevor Lawton, mid-40s, broad in the chest, a buzz cut fading into a bare scalp. He wore a darts jersey, navy blue with a neon yellow stripe down one sleeve and a local sponsor on the back. 3 men stood behind him in matching polos, drinking from pint glasses and leaning against the wall like they owned it. "All right, mate," Trevor said, holding out a hand. His grip was firm, but distracted, already turned half back to his group, who offered a round of exaggerated whistles and oohs. Dougie nodded, said nothing. The scorekeeper, a young man in a red lanyard who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else, gave them the rules quickly, though neither needed them. Best of 5 legs. Closest to the bull throws first. Trevor threw. Outer bull. Dougie stepped forward. Adjusted. Released. Bullseye. The room didn't cheer. It wasn't that kind of crowd. But a few heads turned. Trevor grinned. "Looks like we've got a quiet assassin then." Dougie didn't answer. He was already walking back to his line. The first leg was rough. His hand felt dry, too dry. The dart slipped a little, catching awkwardly on release. Trevor scored steady, a pair of 20s, a treble, then a 15. Dougie scrambled, not badly, but enough to fall behind. He lost the first leg by a clean margin. He didn't curse, he didn't sigh. He just stood, retrieved his darts, and rolled one slowly between his fingers like a coin. Second leg. Something steadied, not in the room, in him. The crowd noise faded. The dartboard, once too bright, seemed to ease into his vision. He stepped up, exhaled, and let the dart fly. Treble 20, treble 20, single 18. The men in Trevor's corner fell silent. Third leg. Dougie took it again, this time with a high checkout. Double 16, right in the corner, the kind of throw that required quiet precision, no flair. Fourth leg, tight. Both men neck and neck. Treble here, miss there. But when Trevor missed his double by a hair, Dougie stepped in and closed it with a soft thud into the double 8. Game. He didn't pump a fist. He didn't nod or exhale. He just looked at the board, then at his hand, then at Trevor. "Good match," he said, quiet and direct. Trevor gave him a tight smile. "Didn't think you had that in you." Dougie shrugged. "Neither did I." He turned away and walked back toward the edge of the hall. As he sat down again, he looked toward the bracket board. A volunteer had taken a black marker and neatly written, "MacCrae, Round 2. It didn't feel like winning. It felt like something deeper. A small piece of proof. A weight properly measured. The chair beneath him was cold again. He hadn't noticed when he'd sat down, but now that the adrenaline had drained, his body registered everything. the ache in his knees, the dryness in his throat, the tight seam at the edge of his collar. He took a long sip from the water bottle he'd packed, the plastic crinkling slightly as he squeezed. Across the room, a few matches were still finishing. The boards clattered with occasional darts. A cheer rose from one corner, then fell flat. A man in a white jacket kicked the wall behind his board with a loud thud before apologizing to the scorekeeper. Dougie rolled one of his darts between his fingers. It moved easily now. No tremor, no misstep. Just the quiet, weightless rotation of something familiar. He felt calm. Not because he'd won, not even because he'd played well, but because the thing he was doing, this game, this strange, narrow pursuit, had started to feel like a space he could move inside. Not performance, not escape, just presence. People were watching him now. He noticed that. Not everyone, not openly. But as players passed by, some glanced at his badge. One man nodded as he walked past, as if they'd met somewhere before. Another gave a small, skeptical smile, the kind you give someone who doesn't look like much, but just took out your friend. And then there was the young man near the back wall, late 20s, tall, long frame, black track jacket, leaned casually against the door frame with a pint of something pale in his hand. His eyes tracked Dougie with careful stillness, not assessing, measuring. He didn't look away when Dougie noticed him. He didn't smile either. Dougie didn't return the look. He just stood, slowly, and moved toward one of the sideboards where no match was taking place. The chalkboard had been wiped down. The tape on the floor was faded. He took up position behind the line, raised his arm, and threw. Treble 20. Another treble. Low single. He retrieved the darts, threw again. His form was tighter now, not cautious, but deliberate. A small correction in the shoulder, a steadier follow-through. The repetitions had become more than habit. They were ritual. And somewhere between the board and the breath, his body had started to speak a language his mind barely understood. Another throw. Bullseye. Someone nearby clapped, just once, just softly. He didn't turn to look. He wasn't playing against anyone yet. But something inside him had shifted. This was no longer about proving he belonged here. Now, it was about seeing how far he could go before that feeling stopped. MacCrae and Van to board 1, Block C, semi-final. The name clicked in Dougie's ear. Not his own, but the one that followed it. Van. He had seen it before, mentioned by Jimmy once in passing. Sean Van. Goes by Sven, young, serious arm. Semi-pro, people said. Not flashy, but cold. Good under pressure. Played for England B last year. Some called him the next big thing. Dougie turned toward the front board. The man in the black track jacket was already walking there, pint glass gone, dart case in hand. His steps were clean, effortless, like he already knew where everything was. He didn't glance back. Dougie followed. The main board was better lit. Cleaner floor, newer tape. A small elevated platform gave it a feeling of distance from the others. 2 portable spotlights were aimed at the wall, casting stark shadows behind the players. Sven stood with his back to the crowd, placing his darts on the rail in front of the board. His movements were economical, almost surgical. When Dougie arrived, he extended a hand. "Sean Van," he said. His voice was crisp. Accent London, with an edge of practiced calm. "Everyone just calls me Sven." "Dougie," he said. "Yeah." Sven replied. "I saw your first game." "Neat throw." Dougie nodded. "Yours?" Sven shrugged. "Doesn't count till finals." They shook hands. No smile, no bravado. The scorekeeper stood ready. Sven threw first for bull, outer bull. Dougie stepped forward. He closed his fingers, breathed once, threw. Single 12. Sven would throw first. It began quickly. His opening throw, treble 20, treble 20, single 19. The crowd, such as it was, stirred. Someone muttered, "Jesus!" Dougie answered with a decent score, a clean 74. But Sven was already ahead. The first leg vanished in 4 rounds. Dougie landed his double too late. Sven didn't miss his. Second leg. Dougie slowed his breathing, found the rhythm. Treble, treble, treble. A perfect 180, no cheer. Just a few eyebrows raised. Sven raised his chin. Nice. Dougie won the second leg, narrowly. 1-1, third leg, tight. Then a miss, 1 dart, 1 rushed throw into the outer ring. And Sven took advantage. He finished with a double 20, so smooth it felt like a signature. 2-1, fourth leg. Dougie clawed back. Treble 20, single 20, bullseye. He took it, tied the match, 2-2. Final leg. Everything slowed down. Even Sven, for all his composure, began to blink longer between throws. Both of them stood quieter now, not with nerves, with concentration, like 2 men lining up the same target, knowing only one would get there first. Sven opened strong. Dougie kept pace, point for point. But at the end, Dougie left himself with a 22 checkout, awkward. Sven landed a clean double 11 on his first try. The game ended with no cheer, just a few murmurs, a handful of claps, 1 soft whistle. Sven walked over, offered his hand. "You played like a pro," he said, "just not long enough." Dougie took the handshake. "You don't miss much." Sven gave a slight smile. "Not today." Then he was gone, already heading back to the prep area, pulling a phone from his pocket. Dougie stood still for a moment, not angry, not disappointed, just aware. He had found his limit, for now. And the strange thing was, it didn't feel like failure. It felt like the edge of a map, something waiting beyond it. The ride back from Sterling was quiet. Jimmy had done most of the talking for the first hour. Bits of praise, observations about technique, a few jokes at the expense of Sven's haircut. But eventually he gave up. Dougie wasn't rude, just distant, like the conversation had become something happening around him, not with him. They stopped once for tea and sausage rolls. Dougie ate slowly, hands still tense around the cup, like they hadn't remembered how to relax yet. When they reached Falkirk, Jimmy gave a lazy wave from the driver's side. "You done good," he said, "and you're not done." Dougie nodded and stepped out. The door clicked shut behind him. Eilidh met him at the front door with a soft smile and a folded dish towel in one hand. "How was it?" she asked. He kissed her cheek lightly. It was real. She smiled at that, but didn't ask what it meant. Over the next 3 days, he barely spoke about the tournament. He didn't mention Sven, didn't mention the last leg, not even the scores. What he did do was return to the garage. Each morning after tea, he'd disappear for an hour or 2, sometimes 3. He didn't always throw, Sometimes he just stood there, dart in hand, staring at the board like it might say something back. The routine brought comfort, but not closure. It wasn't about shaking off the loss. It was about learning what to do now that he'd seen what could come next. Eilidh watched all this with her usual patience. She'd started writing in the mornings, notes for something longer, maybe fiction, maybe memoir. She didn't say. He didn't ask. In the evenings, they ate together, cleaned up together, and spoke in low, familiar tones about things that didn't matter. Until Wednesday. That afternoon, the sky had turned a quiet blue, cold and thin, but clear. Dougie had just come in from the garage and was standing at the kitchen sink, washing his hands, when he heard it. A knock at the door. Not the post, not the neighbor. A firm, deliberate knock. 2 beats, a pause, then one more. He turned off the tap, dried his hands, opened the door. And there he was, Callum, taller than he remembered, hair longer at the front, wearing a wool coat and a canvas satchel slung over his shoulder. His eyes were the same, though, sharp, observant, a little too quick. "All right, Dad," he said, shifting his weight. Dougie blinked. "You want to come in?" Callum shrugged. "I suppose I'd better." He stepped inside, wiping his shoes automatically on the mat. Dougie closed the door, still holding the towel in his hand. "I wasn't expecting—" "I heard you've been throwing darts," Callum said, turning toward him with a faint smile. "Thought I'd see what that was all about." The kitchen looked smaller with Callum in it, not because he was large, though he was taller than Dougie remembered, but because his presence filled the space in a way few others ever had. He didn't slouch, didn't shuffle. He stood like he was prepared to walk out again at any second, coat unbuttoned, hands loose at his sides. Dougie poured the tea slowly. Callum took his mug with a quiet, "Thanks," and sat at the table. They hadn't spoken face-to-face in over 2 months. Texts here and there, a birthday call, a shared shrug of agreement about not bothering with Christmas plans. And now this. The dartboard had drawn him in. Dougie stirred his own tea, but didn't drink. "So," Callum said, resting back in the chair, "is it true you almost knocked out some semi-pro kid in Sterling?" Dougie didn't smile, but there was a faint twitch in the corner of his mouth. "I didn't knock anyone out." "That's not what Morag says." "Morag wasn't there. Morag says you were on fire, and that there's talk going round the pubs." Callum mimicked her accent just enough to get a rise. Dougie took a sip of tea. "There's always talk going round the pubs." Callum raised his eyebrows. "So, you're not denying it. I played. I lost. It was close. Close against a semi-pro's not nothing." Dougie said nothing. Callum's smile faded a little. He looked at the table, then around the kitchen, then back to his father. "Why darts?" he asked finally. "I mean, why now?" Dougie exhaled through his nose. The question had weight, but it wasn't accusatory. He turned the mug in his hand once, twice. "I don't know," he said. "It felt like something I could do, that asked everything of me and didn't expect me to explain it." Callum nodded slowly. "You always did like things that didn't talk back." That landed closer than either of them expected. Dougie glanced out the window. It wasn't meant to be anything. But it is now. Maybe. They sat in silence a while. The house around them was quiet. The ticking of the clock on the wall filled the room with its soft, consistent beat. Then Dougie stood. "You want to see it?" he asked. Callum looked up. "The board," Dougie added. Callum hesitated, then shrugged. "Sure." The garage smelled like old wood and colder air. The floor was clean, the tape line still crisp. The board hung at the far end, centered under the bare bulb. 3 darts rested on the shelf beside it. Callum stood with his hands in his pockets, scanning the space. "This is where it happens?" Dougie nodded. "More or less." Callum stepped up to the tape. "Can I?" "Go ahead." Dougie handed him the darts. Callum weighed one in his hand. "Lighter than I thought." He took his stance, too far back, awkward in the shoulder, and threw. Thunk. It landed in the 2. "All right," he muttered. Second throw, outer ring. Third, wide miss. He grinned. "Terrible." "You were leaning too far forward." Callum handed the darts back. "I'm not built for precision." "You are." Dougie didn't answer. He placed the darts back on the shelf. They stood there a moment longer. Then Callum said, "I think it's good. That you're doing something." "Not everyone agrees." Callum looked at him. "Mum?" Dougie shook his head. "She's fine. We had plans, and now we don't talk about them much." Callum nodded. "Plans can bend, so long as they don't break." That sounded like something he'd learned from teaching, or from living. Dougie nodded once, barely. They stood in silence a moment longer, facing the board. Then Callum clapped his hands softly. "All right. Show me how it's actually done, then." Dougie stepped forward, took 1 dart, no ceremony. He threw. Bullseye. Callum laughed. "Well, shit." And for the first time that day, Dougie smiled. It was Saturday morning when the knock came. Not rushed, not urgent. Just the kind of knock that came from someone who knew you'd be home and wasn't in a hurry. Dougie opened the door. Jimmy stood there, hands in the pockets of a windbreaker, a flat folder tucked under one arm. His face wasn't smug, but it wasn't neutral either. It was the look of someone with a card up his sleeve and a quiet pleasure in revealing it. "Got a minute?" he asked. Dougie nodded and stepped aside. The 2 men sat in the front room. Jimmy didn't take off his coat. He laid the folder across his lap like it might get up and walk away if he didn't keep pressure on it. "I made a call," Jimmy said, without preamble, "to a mate who used to run tables at the Glasgow Open. He owes me a favor." Dougie said nothing. Just listened. Jimmy opened the folder. Inside was a printed flyer, thick paper, color ink, with bold letters across the top. Scottish Invitational Series, Glasgow South Bracket. March 8th to 9th, 2025. Pro-Am qualifier / televised feed / entry by selection only. "I told him about you," Jimmy said, tapping the paper. "I told him what I saw in Stirling. And he said if I put my name on it, he'd pencil you in." Dougie leaned back slightly. "You're not a manager." "No, but I've got eyes, and I've got people who trust them." He slid the flyer across the coffee table toward Dougie. "This isn't the pub leagues anymore. This is the edge of the real thing. Players who are chasing sponsors, points, rankings. A few who've already dipped into the PDC system." Dougie didn't touch the paper. He stared at it like it was a piece of furniture that had appeared in his house without being carried in. "Why now?" he asked. "Because now you know you can stand up there and not fall apart. And because there's only so long before the quiet guy with the neat throw disappears back into his shed and no one remembers. From the kitchen, a drawer closed. Eilidh had heard at least some of it. Jimmy glanced in that direction but didn't lower his voice. "You don't have to say yes," he said. "You can fold it in half, put it in a drawer, and get back to your crossword and your jam on toast. You've already gone further than anyone expected." Dougie still didn't answer. Jimmy stood. "I'm not your coach. I'm not your boss. But I'm the guy who noticed, and that counts for something." He didn't offer a handshake this time, just nodded once. "I'll need to know by next Friday." That's when they locked the bracket. Then he left. Dougie sat for a long time. When Eilidh came into the room, drying her hands on a dish towel, she didn't ask what Jimmy said. She saw the flyer, read the top line, said nothing for a while. Then, "Would you go alone?" He looked up. "I don't know." She sat beside him, not close, just beside. "You're not surprising me anymore," she said, voice quiet. "I think that's the strange part. I think I've already made room for this version of you in my head, and I don't know what that means." He turned to her, unsure of what to say. She reached out and gently touched the edge of the flyer, then pulled her hand back like it was too hot. "If you go," she said, "just don't pretend you're doing it for us. It's all right if it's just for you." The flyer stayed on the table, untouched, but it filled the room all the same. The garage was colder than usual. The wind had picked up after sundown, and the thin seam around the door let in just enough air to make the light bulb tremble above him. Dougie stood at the edge of the tape line, not moving, not holding the darts. The board loomed at the far end, unchanged, circular, still waiting. He didn't turn the heater on. He didn't flick the switch for the little radio he kept on the shelf. He just stood there, jacket zipped up to his neck, hands in his pockets, eyes locked on the board. Behind him, the house was silent. No kettle boiling. No crossword clues spoken aloud. No sound of footsteps upstairs. Just the thrum of wind and the slow ache in his knees. He stepped forward once, stopped, then stepped back. He wasn't here to throw, not tonight. He'd thrown enough. The flyer still sat on the table inside, bright and official, with its promises of televised matches and qualifiers and names he'd never heard before. But the board didn't care about any of that. The board didn't know what day it was. It didn't know how old he was or what he'd done for 30 years before picking up a set of darts. It didn't know about Jimmy, or Sven, or Eilidh, or Callum. The board only knew what landed and what didn't, and for reasons he couldn't explain, even to himself, that felt like something pure. He looked down at the tape line. It was slightly frayed at the edge. His heel had caught it a few days earlier. He knelt, pressed the edge back into place, and smoothed it down with his palm. There. He stood again. Not to throw, just to feel the position, the angle, the distance. It was the same as always, but something inside him was different. Not louder, not clearer, just there, like a faint rhythm beneath the silence, waiting to be followed. Not for glory, not for recognition, just to see what it meant to keep going, even now, especially now. The sun wasn't fully up yet. A dim haze filtered through the kitchen window, just enough to backlight the soft shape of Eilidh at the table, robe tied loosely at the waist, hair still wet from the shower, the newspaper folded in front of her like a familiar conversation partner. Dougie stood in the doorway for a moment. The quiet between them was natural, not heavy, just there. She looked up, saw him, and nodded toward the kettle. "There's still some hot." He poured himself a mug, sat down opposite her. Neither of them looked at the flyer, but it was there, right between the salt shaker and the folded crossword book, like a guest they hadn't acknowledged yet. She turned a page. He stirred his tea. No sugar. "I think I want to go," he said. She didn't look up immediately. Just finished the paragraph she was reading, then folded the page and set the paper aside. Her face was calm. Her eyes studied him with the kind of focus that had once terrified him when they were newly married. And then she asked, softly, "Will I be there?" He opened his mouth, closed it. She waited. "Yes," he said. No hesitation this time, no caveats. She exhaled through her nose, picked up her tea, took a slow sip, then nodded once. "All right, then." They didn't toast, didn't shake hands, didn't map out a travel plan or talk about hotels or expenses. It wasn't a project, it was a path. And now, they were both on it. Dougie reached for the flyer, folded it in half, and slid it into the center drawer of the sideboard. Not to hide it, but to keep it safe. He looked out the window. The light had grown just slightly brighter, still gray, but with a kind of promise in it. She reached across the table, not dramatically, and brushed a crumb off his sleeve. "You'll need to iron that jacket," she said. He smiled. The bell above the door still didn't work properly. It jangled halfway when Dougie pushed through, the metal coil scraping like it needed oil. The sound used to go unnoticed, just one of 100 background noises in the tartan dog. But today, it drew a glance. Not all at once, but enough. Dougie stepped inside, shoulders slightly hunched, out of habit more than discomfort. It wasn't his pub, not really, but he'd been coming here long enough to know where the floor creaked and which stools had a wobble. Familiarity, comfort. Today, it felt different, not unfriendly, but warmer in a way that made his skin itch. He walked up to the bar, nodded to the lad pouring pints. New face, 20 at most, eager and overcompensating. "Half a heavy," Dougie said. The kid grinned. "You're the darts guy, yeah?" Dougie raised an eyebrow. "Saw the post on Jimmy's page," the kid added. "You're going to Glasgow?" Before Dougie could answer, Jimmy appeared from the back, damp bar towel slung over one shoulder, brow furrowed like he hadn't slept. "You still talking to customers, Cammy?" he barked, deadpan. The lad snapped to it, pouring the pint. Dougie turned to Jimmy, who gave him a once-over, and nodded. "You look like a man who's decided something," Jimmy said. "I have." Jimmy said nothing more, just handed him the half-pint and walked away. Dougie took a sip, then turned toward the dartboard. A few regulars were already there. Lenny from the carpet shop, Ross, who always wore that battered Hibbs jacket, even though he wasn't from Edinburgh. They were mid-game, but paused when they saw him. "Hey there," Ross called. "Want in on the next one?" Dougie hesitated. "Sure." As he waited, he leaned back against the high table near the wall. The pub was busier than usual for a Tuesday. Or maybe it just felt that way. Eyes moved. Heads nodded. The laughter was louder somehow, but not quite the same as before. A couple of men near the far end were whispering, not rudely, just curious. One of them pointed at Dougie's back, not realizing he could see the reflection in the mirror behind the bar. He took another sip, said nothing. When it was his turn, he stepped up without ceremony. Lenny offered him one of the pub darts, but Dougie had brought his own. Not flashy, just familiar. First throw, treble 20. Lenny whistled. Still got it. Second throw, treble again. Ross laughed. We're playing for fun, mate. Dougie smiled faintly. So am I. By the end of the match, half the room was watching. Not crowding, not heckling, just watching. And that's when he felt it. The difference. Before, he was a man who played darts. Now, he was the one going to Glasgow. The pub had decided. He was theirs now, in some small, odd way. Whether he succeeded or failed, his name was attached to this place. A thread tying him to every pint, every board, every loose bit of chalk. As he packed up his darts, Jimmy returned to his side, wiping his hands. You good? He asked. I'm fine. Jimmy didn't smile. You're not invisible anymore. I noticed. You all right with that? Dougie looked around. At the faces, the old wood panels, the faint scuff of a boot on the sticky floor. He didn't answer right away. Then, it was never about being seen. Jimmy gave a slow nod. No, he said. But you are now. And Dougie knew he wasn't just talking about the pub. The phone rang once in the middle of the afternoon. Dougie was in the garage, not throwing, just sorting a drawer of tools he hadn't opened in months. He heard the ring through the thin garage wall, muffled by distance and insulation. By the time he reached the kitchen, it had gone to voicemail. He glanced at the screen. Unknown number. He left it. 10 minutes later, it rang again. Same number. This time, he picked up. Hello, Mr. MacCrae. A woman's voice, bright but not chirpy. Confident, a little cautious. This is Anna Grant. I'm a journalist with the Falkirk Herald. I hope I'm not interrupting anything. Dougie leaned against the counter. I'm not busy. Well, she continued, I've had your name come up a few times over the past week. Local pubs, a darts group on Facebook, and just this morning I got a message from someone at the Tartan Dog saying, and I quote, the quiet guy's going pro. Dougie didn't laugh, but his mouth twitched. I think they're overstating it. Maybe. But there's a story here, and I'd love to talk to you for a short piece. Nothing invasive, just local color, community interest. A Falkirk man chasing something new. He hesitated. I don't need long, she added. 10 minutes? You can hang up any time. He exhaled through his nose. All right, go ahead. She was ready. What's your name again? Douglas MacCrae. And your age? 50. And you've been playing darts for... since March. There was a pause, a soft laugh on her end. Sorry, just confirming. This March? Aye. Well, yes, he corrected himself. Remembered the audiobook. And now you're entering the Glasgow Invitational? That's what they're calling it, yes. She asked about Sterling. He kept it short. A few details. No embellishment. He mentioned Sven only once, and not by name. So, she said finally, why start now? He hesitated. I was retiring, he said. I thought I'd feel finished. But I didn't. I just felt paused. And darts unpaused you? Not at first. At first it was something to do, something small. But it became something clear. It gave me a place to aim. Anna was quiet for a moment. Do you want to win in Glasgow? Of course. But is that the goal? He thought about that, really thought. "No," he said at last. "The goal is to stand there, in front of the board, with the weight of the thing in my hand, and still want to throw." She exhaled, like she hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath. "Thank you," she said. "That's better than I hoped." He didn't know what to say. "I'll email you a draft before it goes out," she added. "Should run next week." "All right. Good luck, Mr. MacCrae." He hung up. The kitchen was quiet again. The hum of the fridge. The faint click of the clock above the door. He looked down at the phone in his hand, then, slowly, placed it on the table. Words had left him now, gone out into the world, written down by someone else, waiting to be printed, read, remembered. He wasn't invisible anymore, and somehow that felt heavier than he'd expected. The rain had passed overnight, but the sky still hung low, swollen and gray, like a ceiling that hadn't quite made up its mind. Dougie stepped out just after 8. The town hadn't woken fully yet. Buses hissed softly at the roundabout, and the windows of the bakery fogged in and out with motion. He didn't go out to buy the paper. He didn't need to. At the corner shop, the woman at the till, the younger one with the silver nose ring, said, "You're the darts guy, right?" He nodded. "Sometimes." She grinned. "My gran read the whole thing out loud this morning over toast." By the time he got back home, the article had already been shared on the Herald's website. Callum texted a screenshot with just the words, "Not bad for a retired insurance man." When he opened the site himself, it was easy to find. "Local man to compete in Glasgow. Invite after surprise darts success." By Anna Grant. Falkirk Herald. March 3rd, 2025. 50-year-old Douglas MacCrae never planned to pick up a dart in retirement, let alone challenge Scotland's rising talent. But after a string of impressive showings in local competitions, the quiet former insurance analyst is now preparing for his biggest match yet at this month's Glasgow Invitational. "I thought I'd feel finished," MacCrae said in a short phone interview. "But I just felt paused." MacCrae began throwing casually in his garage last year, with no background in professional sport. A regular at the Tartan Dog in town, he credits pub owner Jimmy Petrie with encouraging him to compete. "He's got a stillness to him," Petrie said. "When he's at the line, you can hear the rest of the room disappear." MacCrae will be one of the oldest competitors in this year's bracket, and possibly the only one who took up the sport after retirement. Asked whether he aims to win, MacCrae answered simply, "The goal is to stand there, in front of the board, with the weight of the thing in my hand, and still want to throw." The tournament will be held March 8th to 9th at the Glasgow South Events Centre, and tickets are available through the SIS website. Dougie closed the tab. He sat for a long while at the kitchen table, cup of tea going cold, eyes fixed on the middle distance, not thinking, not planning, just being. Eilidh came in a little later. She didn't say anything at first. She placed the paper beside him, a physical copy folded back to the article. She had underlined one sentence in pencil. "The goal is to stand there." She clipped the article out with scissors, placed it in a clean envelope, and slid it into the second drawer beneath the microwave, the one with old birthday cards and Polaroids from trips they hadn't talked about in years. She didn't ask him how it felt. She didn't need to. That night at the Tartan Dog, someone had pinned the article to the corkboard beside the dartboard. It wasn't centered. It was crooked. The tape was fraying at the corners already. but it was there. A dozen locals gathered around it at different times. No one made a big deal, but they looked, they read, and then they turned to look at him, the quiet man with the clean throw, who now lived on a page. Dougie stood near the end of the bar, pint in hand, not speaking. And for the first time, he didn't feel like the man who had stumbled into all this. He felt like someone who had chosen it. He'd never had a training routine before. Not really. The garage had always been something between a refuge and a ritual, a place where the day settled around him like dust, where the shape of time felt elastic. Some days he'd throw for 5 minutes, others 2 hours. Always the same distance, the same board, the same line on the floor, frayed at the corner. But now, with the invitational drawing close, 4 days, then 3, then 2, the space around him seemed to narrow. His throws weren't just muscle memory anymore. They had context. They pointed somewhere. Eilidh noticed first. He'd always kept a small notepad on the workbench for household measurements, old shed repairs, a grocery list once in a while. But now it was filled with numbers, not scores, intervals, tallies. Dougie was counting how long it took him to warm up, how often he hit doubles cold, how many throws before his grip began to tire. He didn't do it obsessively, but he did it deliberately. Jimmy noticed next. "Your line's tighter," he said one evening after a round at the tartan dog. "Not just in the arm, in the face." Dougie blinked. "In the face?" "Yeah, you're not blinking as much. You used to do this little flutter thing right before you threw." Dougie thought for a moment. "I did." "It's gone now." They sat together after closing, 2 nearly empty glasses between them, Jimmy flipping a coaster over and over like a nervous habit. "You're not just throwing," Jimmy said. "You're preparing." "I suppose I am." "You nervous?" Dougie shook his head. "No, just aware." Jimmy grinned. "That's a better answer than ready." At home, Eilidh didn't hover, but she was present. She'd started coming to the garage, notebook in hand, just after tea. She didn't call it coaching. She didn't call it anything. She just sat near the door on an old folding chair, pencil in hand, quietly noting his groupings. Sometimes she'd ask about tempo. Sometimes she'd correct his angle. "Your right heel lifts a little when you lean too far forward," she said one evening, not looking up from the page. He didn't argue. "Try planting it." He did. The throw landed clean. Neither of them said anything. Later, she handed him the notebook. "I think you need to print this," she said, tapping one page. "The board in Glasgow will be set up with an outer edge. You might need to adjust for the shadow line." He read it twice. "Where did you learn that?" She shrugged. "The forums. People love a man with a clean release." They laughed, not loudly. The house felt smaller that week, not because it was cramped, but because everything had tightened. There was no clutter, no idle talk, no drifting afternoons, only meals, throws, notes, tea. It wasn't tense. It was focused. They didn't speak about winning. They didn't speak about what came after. But on the morning before the tournament, Dougie laid out his bag carefully. Darts, backup stems, his old pub shoes, the dark blue button-down she liked. As he zipped it shut, Eilidh said from the hallway, "You'll walk in quiet." He looked up. She smiled. "And make a mess of their expectations." He smiled back. For the first time, he thought she might be right. The train rolled into Glasgow Queen Street at 4:42 p.m. Dougie stepped off with a single bag over his shoulder. Eilidh followed, gloved hands clasped around the handle of her small roller case. The wind met them as soon as they reached the main concourse. That dry city wind, bouncing between glass towers and sandstone corners. The station was loud, fast, everything that Falkirk wasn't. He didn't say a word until they reached the taxi queue. "Hotel first," he said. Eilidh nodded. The driver took them across the river and south through the traffic toward a mid-range hotel beside the events center, boxy, built for convenience. Their room was clean, quiet, efficient, twin beds, a kettle, a view of the parking lot, and, just past it, the long glass facade of the Glasgow South Events Centre, the venue. From here, it looked like a shopping centre with ambitions, but the buzz around it, even on a Friday night, was unmistakable. Posters taped to lampposts, young men unloading cases of equipment, a radio van idling with its lights off. Eilidh stepped up beside him at the window. "It's big," she said. He nodded. "Bigger than Stirling. You all right?" He looked down at the forecourt, where a pair of players were unloading dart cases and chatting, laughing too loudly, one of them already in his branded shirt. "I don't think I'm nervous," he said. "That's all right," she said. "Just don't wait until tomorrow to feel it." They didn't unpack much. He lay down for a while. She sat with her notebook. Neither of them said much. At 7, they walked over together for early registration. The events center glowed white-blue under floodlights, the big front windows revealing the echoing inner space. Wide concourse, rows of high tables, LED screens along the walls. Inside, it smelled faintly of carpet cleaner and fried food. The overhead lights buzzed. Everything was brighter, sharper, faster than Dougie remembered from any local event. The main hall stretched in every direction. Half a dozen lanes, all already in use for warm-ups. Sound ricocheted off every surface. Darts striking board, shoes squeaking, laughs that didn't belong to anything. A young man in a red lanyard handed him a competitor badge. Dougie MacCrae, unseeded qualifier, board 4A. He took it, nodded, stepped aside. Eilidh watched everything, not like a tourist, like someone making a map. "That one," she whispered, nodding toward a tall man warming up near the centerboard. "He's doing something with his foot. Little hop before he throws. Couldn't be sustainable." Dougie gave a small smile. "You taking notes?" "I live with a dartboard now," she said. "I've learned a few things." They didn't stay long, just enough to register, just enough to breathe it in. Back at the hotel, she ran a bath. He stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the faraway blur of headlights over the M74. He wasn't excited. He wasn't afraid. He just was. Tomorrow, everything would narrow to the line, the board, the dart. But tonight, he stood on the quiet edge of the thing and waited. The arena was awake, not loud exactly, but alert, like a room full of people all tuned to the same frequency. Chairs scraped, announcers' voices crackled through speakers, scoreboards buzzed to life overhead. Laughter surged and dropped like weather. Dougie sat in a folding chair near the back row, badge clipped to the breast pocket of his button-down. He had warmed up early. Not much, just enough to feel his rhythm, to loosen his shoulder. Then he stopped. No need to overthink the arm. His match was called at 11:47. Block B, board 4A. MacCrae and Ellis to the line. He rose without a word, the bag over one shoulder. Eilidh offered a nod from her seat in the far corner. not smiling, just with him. That was enough. The board was toward the middle of the hall, not center stage, but not out of the way either. Enough foot traffic nearby that the pressure felt real. Enough distance from the exits that there was no easy escape. His opponent was already there. Late 20s, athletic. Dart jersey with a sponsor stitched on the chest. Hair styled too precisely. He bounced slightly on his toes as Dougie approached, clearly in his element. "All right, mate," the man said, sticking out a hand. "Riley Ellis. Welcome to the show." Dougie shook it. "Dougie." "Yeah, I know," Riley said. "You're the pub story, right?" "Guy from the paper?" Dougie nodded once. "That's me." Riley smiled like a man who'd already won. The scorekeeper stood between them. Standard set. Best of 5 legs. Winner advances. They each took one practice round. Just 3 darts. Dougie's first landed high. His second, too flat. Riley sank a treble 20 on his second throw and grinned toward the crowd behind him. Dougie breathed through his nose, then stepped up to throw for bull. Riley, outer bull. Dougie, green wire, just outside. Riley would start, and just like that, it began. First leg, and the room pressed in. Not just the noise, though there was plenty. Not just the eyes, though they were there, some watching from the edge, some already whispering his name like they wanted to be the first to say it later. It was the weight of it, the lights overhead casting long shadows, the echo of each missed dart landing just a little too hard. Riley played fast, smooth, loud when he scored high, louder when he missed and wanted the room to laugh with him. Dougie threw 72, then 60, then a rough 41. His hand wasn't trembling, but it wasn't clean. Something in his shoulder tightened with every glance over his own shoulder. The board seemed smaller than usual, the oak longer. He lost the first leg without ever finding his breath. Riley smirked as they reset. "Take your time, mate. Long way to go." Dougie didn't answer. He stepped back, stared at the line. The tape here was perfect, measured by the organizers to the millimeter. The same standard as every other tournament. Not a speck of fray or dust. But his foot settled on it like he'd known it forever. And then, for just a moment, he remembered. The garage, the bulb above his head, the stillness, the silence, the breath before the throw. He exhaled and stepped forward. The second leg began like the first, quickly. Riley stepped up and sank his first 2 darts in the treble 20, landing a clean 140. He turned with a grin, arms raised in a half-joking victory pose toward his mates in the corner. But Dougie didn't see them. Not anymore. He saw the board. He saw the line. He saw the dart in his hand, the soft dullness of its barrel where his thumb settled into the groove. Step forward, shoulder square, breath in, exhale, throw, single 20, treble 20, single 18. He didn't react. He stepped back, waited. Riley scored again, not quite as strong this time. 92. Dougie returned to the oche and threw. Thud, treble 20. Thud, single 19. Thud, treble 17. His hand didn't shake. His breath didn't stutter. The noise of the hall, the scorekeepers, the other boards, the announcer calling out results from the back wall, all of it had dimmed. Not gone, just irrelevant. He finished the leg with a clean double 16. The board didn't cheer. It wasn't that kind of crowd yet. But something shifted. Riley laughed it off, but there was a flicker in his eyes now. The smallest twitch of calculation. He was no longer entertaining. He was measuring. The third leg started with Dougie throwing first, and he opened with a 137. Riley answered poorly, 63. His grip was a little too fast this time, a beat too sharp. Dougie took his time. He didn't slow the match down on purpose, but he didn't rush. Every throw was measured, every retrieval quiet. He landed another treble, another single, another clean round. No flash. Just fluency. When he finished the leg with a double 20, he didn't look up. 2-1. Now, the crowd murmured. Not loudly, but enough that Riley heard it. He wiped his palms on his jersey, adjusted his stance, smiled too hard at someone across the aisle. Fourth leg. Riley needed it. And he came at it fast, hit a strong opening, but his second round sagged. A dart flew wide, the next bounced low. Dougie didn't pounce. He didn't chase. He just threw. Treble 20, single 20, treble 18, and again, and again. The match, just minutes ago, had belonged to the younger man, the fast one, the loud one, the sure one. But now it belonged to the rhythm, to the breath, to the board. When Dougie sank the double 10 to close the fourth leg, he stepped back and exhaled. Tied. 2-2. No triumph in his face, only quiet, only stillness. Fifth leg. Ellis to throw first. The scorekeeper's voice was flat, functional, but it rang like a bell. Riley stepped up, jaw tight now, eyes darting between the board and the growing number of spectators at the periphery. He threw a 100. Solid, but not enough to shake anything loose. Dougie stepped forward, placed his foot behind the line like he was settling into familiar ground. No audience, no lights, just the board. Thud, treble 20, thud, single 19, thud, treble 17. He stepped back, no fist pump, no look around, just back. Riley scored again, smaller, 83. Dougie threw 76, then 80, then 61. It wasn't perfect, but it was even. Riley missed a double, just one. It was enough. Dougie stepped up with 32 remaining. He looked at the board, found the outer ring, double 16. He raised the dart, not with bravado, with purpose. One breath, one throw. Thud. The dart landed clean, firm, deliberate, dead center of the double ring. There was no explosion from the crowd, just a ripple, a few scattered claps, one shout, "Come on then!" from the back wall. Riley let out a long breath, hands on hips, not angry, just beaten. The scorekeeper called it. Leg, match, MacCrae. Dougie stepped forward, shook Riley's hand. No sarcasm, no apology. "Good game," he said. Riley nodded. "Didn't see that coming." "Neither did I." He meant it. He turned, and the small group of people gathered beyond the taped line stepped back to let him through, not parting like a sea, but making room. He didn't rush. He didn't look for Eilidh, though he knew exactly where she was. He walked off the floor, past the other boards, past the players warming up, past the announcer checking his clipboard. He didn't feel electric. He didn't feel large. He felt right. Like something had been settled, not finished, just begun. The hallway beyond the event floor was cold with recycled air. Not frigid, not unpleasant, just still. Like the kind of stillness you get in a church after the last hymn is sung. Something has ended, but something else is about to begin, and neither has a name yet. Dougie walked slowly, not tired, not shaken, just aware of himself in a way he hadn't felt in years. His dart case felt weightless in his hand. His steps echoed faintly off the tile. Behind him, the sound of other matches carried through the thick doors. Shouts, thuds, a low cheer. But it all felt far away now, like another life. She was waiting at the end of the corridor, leaning against the painted concrete wall, arms folded, coat unzipped, her hair just slightly out of place. No smile, no raised eyebrows. She didn't move as he approached. And yet somehow, she met him halfway. She extended her hand without speaking. He didn't ask what for. He just took it. Her hand was warm, firm, steady. They stood there for a moment, not looking at each other, not needing to. Then they turned together and began to walk. Down the hall, past the vending machine, past a security guard leaning into a phone call, past a printed poster of tomorrow's bracket, already curling at the corners. No one stopped them. No one congratulated them. No one needed to. Outside, the Glasgow wind pulled at the edges of their coats. And they let it, because something had shifted, not in the world, but in them. Not loudly, but permanently. The bracket went up just after 7 p.m., a row of fresh printouts taped to the wall outside the practice room, creased from the printer, still curling at the edges. 3 players were already huddled around them when Dougie arrived. Their voices were low, half curious, half calculating. He didn't elbow in. He waited. Eventually the others moved on, muttering about matchups, seeding points, group draws. Dougie stepped forward. His name was there. Second round, Saturday, 10:40 a.m. MacCrae versus Dunleavy, seed number 5. He read it twice, then a third time, Dunleavy. He knew the name. Big thrower, left-handed, Scottish Open runner-up 2 years ago, sponsored, the kind of player whose warm-up routines had routines. Dougie traced his own name on the page with his eyes. MacCrae. Same typeface, same line weight, no asterisk, no footnote. Just there, as if it had always been there. He stepped back. Other players passed him, some nodding vaguely in recognition, others too focused to look up. One man, a short, wiry player with a sunken chin and sharp eyes, muttered under his breath as he passed, "Not bad for a wild card." Dougie didn't answer, not out of humility. He just had nothing to add. Back at the hotel, Eilidh was seated at the little desk, updating her notes. She looked up as he entered. "Who is it?" she asked. "Dunleavy." Her pencil paused. "That's a name." He nodded. She didn't say, "Are you ready?" or "What's the plan?" Instead, she closed the notebook and stood. "Tea." He nodded again. She walked to the kettle and flicked it on. The click echoed quietly in the room. As it boiled, he stood by the window, same place he'd been the night before. The city stretched beyond them. Cranes and rooftops, headlights tracing curves along the motorway. It looked no different than it had the day before. But something had changed in him. It wasn't fear, not quite excitement. It was intention. Tomorrow, he'd play a man who belonged here, and he would find out, with no anger, no pressure, no noise, whether he did too. The venue felt different in the morning. Quieter, yes, but not calm. Just contained, like a current beneath the surface, waiting. Dougie arrived early, earlier than he needed to. He hadn't eaten much. Toast, a half cup of tea. Eilidh had walked with him to the doors, then gone off to find a seat, telling him only, "You know what you're doing." He wasn't so sure he did. The practice board stood near the far end of the hall, lit but not yet crowded. He made his way slowly, letting his eyes adjust, letting his limbs settle into the space again. Then he saw him. Dunleavy alone. Not entirely. Someone was filming from a distance on a phone, and another man leaned against the railing with a clipboard. But the thrower himself, he was alone, and utterly still. Not flashy, not dramatic, but precise in a way Dougie could only describe as economical. No wasted motion, no unnecessary breath. He watched the man step forward. Thud, treble 20. Thud, treble 20. Thud, treble 20. He didn't celebrate. He didn't even blink. Just stepped back, waited, then did it again. Dougie stood at the edge of the practice zone, watching. Eventually, Dunleavy turned. Their eyes met. Dunleavy gave a small nod, not respectful, not dismissive, just aware. "You MacCrae?" he asked. Dougie nodded. "Nice work yesterday." "Thanks." Dunleavy stepped forward and picked up his darts. "Didn't expect to play a wild card this round. Makes it interesting. Glad I can help." Dunleavy gave a faint smile. "Don't take this the wrong way, mate. But I don't plan to lose today." Dougie didn't flinch. "I didn't plan to get here either." There was a pause. Then Dunleavy chuckled. Not mockingly. Just honest. "Well," he said, turning back to the board, "that makes two of us curious to see how this goes." He threw again. Another clean round. As Dougie moved to the next board, he didn't feel shaken. Not really. But he did feel narrowed. Dunleavy's presence wasn't threatening, but it carried weight. He was no longer facing pub players or nervous upstarts. He was facing someone who lived in this space, who expected to win not out of ego, but out of structure. And Dougie realized the quiet he had found in his garage, in his body, in his breath. It wasn't special. It wasn't rare. It was just the starting point. And now, the match would teach him the rest. The call came at 10:39. Match 4B, MacCrae, Dunleavy Board 3, now calling. Dougie stood. This time the badge didn't feel strange on his chest. He walked with purpose, eyes steady, case in hand. Not fast, not slow, just forward. Eilidh gave no words as he passed her row, only met his gaze. That was enough. The board looked the same. Of course it did. Same black and cream surface. Same chalkboard hung to the side. Same thick foam mat beneath their feet. But everything around it was different. There were twice as many spectators now. A second official. A scorer on tablet, not paper. and behind them, a man with a headset murmuring into a lapel mic. Dunleavy stood to the right, chalking his hands lightly, jaw working a stick of gum. His shirt bore 4 sponsor logos. Dougie's shirt bore none. They shook hands quickly. No words. The scorekeeper called it out. Best of 7 legs, first to 4. Dunleavy threw for bull. Landed clean. Dougie threw. Outer ring. Dunleavy to start. The first leg was clinical. Dunleavy threw like he had lines in a play. Rehearsed, tight, practiced. 140, 100, 137. He didn't waste time, didn't speak, didn't react. Dougie kept pace. Not perfectly, but closely. He reached the double too late to challenge. Dunleavy cleaned it in 3 darts. No drama. Leg. Dunleavy. Dougie breathed out through his nose. Stepped back. Second leg. Dougie to start. He opened with a treble 20, then a single, then another treble. No cheers, but a soft murmur rippled from the back. He didn't change his pace, just kept breathing, kept stepping forward. Dunleavy hit 134, then 100. Dougie answered, 96, then 85. When he reached the out, 52, he took 2 darts, double, 16. The scorer's voice, leg, MacCrae, 1-1. Dunleavy nodded once. Still no words. Just respect in the form of not underestimating you anymore. Third leg. Dunleavy opened with a 180. The room responded. Loud. Clear. Dougie didn't shake. He stepped forward and threw 100, then 140. The gap closed. By the time Dunleavy reached the double, he had 1 dart left in hand. He missed. Dougie had 64 left. He stepped forward. Single 16. Double 16. Hit. Leg. MacCrae. 2-1. Now the noise was different. Not louder, but focused. People weren't looking at Dunleavy anymore. They were watching Dougie. The 4th leg was Dunleavy's. He didn't crush it, but he reasserted. Treble after treble. Clean. 2-2. 5th leg. Dougie had the darts. He opened well. 125. But Dunleavy responded immediately. The middle of the leg stretched into something taut. A near match. Both men near the double. Both just slightly off. Dougie missed high. Dunleavy missed low. Then Dougie hit. Double 10. 3-2. He turned from the board and saw someone he didn't recognize clapping. Slowly. Thoughtfully. The crowd wasn't big, but it was with him. He'd never felt that before. Not like this. By the 6th leg, Dunleavy had tightened. His throws were near perfect. He gave Dougie no chance. Closed the leg with a bull finish that drew a cheer from the far end of the room. 3-3. Final leg. First to 4. The scorer called it final leg. MacCrae to throw. Dougie stepped forward. He didn't look at Dunleavy. Didn't look at the score. Didn't think about the crowd. He thought about the garage, the tape, the breath, the feel of the dart in his hand. And then he threw. The room was smaller now, not literally, but in feeling. It had tightened, closed in around the board, around the oche, around the rhythm of breath and sound and tension. Dougie stood behind the line. 3 darts in hand. Score, 40. Double top. Dunleavy stood behind him, arms crossed, unreadable. The younger man had missed. Just 1. The double 16. barely outside. The kind of miss that doesn't look like a mistake until it's the one you remember at midnight. Now, Dougie had the throw. Not for style, not for a headline, for everything. He looked at the board, not the crowd, not the scorekeeper, just the thin red rim, the top double, the target. He raised the first dart, held it, didn't throw, set it down on the wood shelf beside the board. The crowd stirred. He raised the second, let it drop back into his palm. Then finally, he lifted the third, the one that felt like the right weight, the right balance, garage weight. He inhaled, held, let the moment stretch. There was no fear, no pride, just one clear question: can I? He threw. Thud. Dead center. The double top split like a whisper. There was silence for a half second. Then noise, not wild, not thunderous, but real. Applause, shouts. A sudden clatter of chairs and voices that had been waiting to believe. Dunleavy stepped forward, hand outstretched. Hell of a throw. Dougie took it. Firm grip. Thanks. No fluke in that, Dunleavy added. No, Dougie said quietly. I don't think there was. The scorekeeper raised his hand. Leg, match, MacCrae. Dougie didn't raise his arms, didn't bow, didn't beam. He exhaled. The sound of his own breath surprised him. It felt like it came from someplace deeper than lungs, someplace older. He turned. Eilidh stood at the edge of the crowd, still and still watching. She didn't wave. She didn't mouth words. But her eyes said it all. Not, I'm proud of you. Not, you did it. Just, I saw. And Dougie nodded once, because that was the only thing left to do. The streets had softened with early evening. Shadows stretched long and slow across the pavement. Glasgow traffic hummed somewhere in the distance, but this part of town, just south of the venue, had slipped into that rare pocket between day and night, where the city feels almost gentle. Dougie walked beside Eilidh, hands in his coat pockets, head bowed slightly. Not from weight, from peace. They didn't speak much. The hotel was only 5 blocks away, but they didn't rush. Every now and then, someone passed them. A couple holding hands, a cyclist dismounting, 2 young boys kicking a bottle cap across the curb. None of them knew who he was. And somehow, that made the moment more real. He wasn't anyone just now. Not a wild card, not a local hero, not a symbol, just a man. And beside him, the woman who had seen it all, not as a spectator, but as a second heartbeat, not once asking him to be more than he was, not once letting him be less. They passed a cafe. The lights were still on. A radio murmured inside. Eilidh glanced at it. We could sit a while, if you want. He shook his head gently. No need. She nodded. They crossed at the next light. No cars came. Halfway across, she said, So. He looked over. You beat him. I did. She smiled faintly. You know what I liked most? What? You didn't celebrate? He chuckled, a dry, tired sound. Didn't know how. No, she said. You did. You just didn't need to. They reached the hotel. He paused outside, looked up at the rooms stacked in rows above them. The building meant nothing, just bricks and rented linens. But tomorrow, it would hold the version of him that knew. He wasn't chasing a dream. He was becoming a man who throws. They stepped inside, past the desk, into the lift. Still, no one said anything big. At the door to their room, Eilidh paused, turned her key, then looked at him with a quiet expression. The same one she'd worn at the wedding, the birth of their daughter, the day he handed in his retirement papers. "You look more like yourself," she said, and he, quietly, agreed. The garage smelled the same. Oil, wood dust, a faint old echo of varnish. The kind of smell that lingers in places kept just well enough not to rot, but never quite clean. Dougie stood just inside the door, hand on the frame. A suitcase sat in the hall behind him, half unpacked. Eilidh was somewhere in the kitchen, running the kettle, humming something under her breath. He hadn't come out here for long. Just a minute. Maybe two. The light overhead flickered when he pulled the string, then held steady. Dull yellow, soft around the edges. The board was there, waiting, exactly where he'd left it. No crowd, no chalkboard, no scorer, no badge clipped to his chest, no bracket, just the board. And the line. He stepped forward. The edge of his shoe touched the strip of worn black tape across the cement, curled slightly at one corner, just like always. He reached for the shelf. The darts were there, too. Cool to the touch, balanced in his palm like an old tool. He didn't warm up, didn't stretch, didn't think. He just threw. Thud. Single 20. Thud. Treble 20. Thud. Single 18. He exhaled, no applause, no music, just breath. He stepped back, looked at the board, and smiled. Not because it was perfect, but because it was his. The line, the board, the silence. Not a place to practice, not a place to hide, a place to be. He stood there for a while longer, one hand in his pocket, the other cradling the remaining darts. And in that quiet, unremarkable space, between throws, between moments, Dougie MacCrae knew with absolute certainty he had started something. And it wasn't done, not even close.